Mr. Chairperson and committee members, the statement that I provide today will provide a shocking example of how mismanaged the Jasper fire was by Parks Canada and should warrant a deeper investigation into this agency's fire management and overall role as guardians of Canada's most important and cultural assets. On the evening of Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024, Arctic Fire Safety Services was contacted by the Alberta Emergency Management Agency to deploy 3 Type 3 fire engines and 11 firefighters to Jasper National Park. The request was later changed to 2 Type 3 engines to Jasper and 1 to another fire. The crews traveled up from Eckville through Highway 93 to Jasper, as well as some crews came in from Fort McMurray through Highway 16. We were informed that the crew were to bring tents and sleeping bags because there were no hotel rooms available in Jasper. The crew had to sleep on along the Jasper fire for 2 nights. On the night of July 24th, based on the verbal report of my crew, numerous issues occurred which affected the ability of firefighters to protect Jasper. There was a backburn which was underway by Parks Canada. The status of the backburn did not appear to be communicated to the structure protection specialist who was in Jasper from the ignition team with Parks Canada. All fire crews were sitting at the Jasper Fire Hall and were not at their pre-planned positions when the main fire entered Jasper because they believed the fire behavior observed was out of the backburn. It was not until reports of the building were on fire that fire crews deployed to save the town site. The scene was described as extremely chaotic.
Mr. Speaker.
Prior to
the... just could we stop here just for a second? Yes, Ms. Leah.
I'm actually having difficulty hearing him in English here.
Pardon me?
I'm having difficulty hearing this.
Yeah, me too.
Witness.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay.
Est-ce que vous entendez mieux en...
Can you hear him better in French, Ms. Posey?
I'm just trying to listen without the headset on, and I'm not really.
Madame Posey, est-ce que vous entendez
Ms. Posey, can you hear well at all through the interpreters? Were you hearing Mr. Levan well?
I don't understand French.
Madame Posey, est-ce que vous entendez...
Ms. Posey, were you able to hear him? Everything is fine there?
It seems to be in English that we have trouble here in the room understanding, but why don't you continue, Mr. Levan, maybe speak
Chair?
a bit slower. Yes, Mr. Longfield.
Yeah, the English is the non-interpreted version is very tinny. And
yes.
Possibly if he spoke more slowly, it might be easier.
Yes.
But it's very hard for me to pick it up.
Yes, please, Mr. Levan, please speak a bit more slowly, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Prior to the Parks fire, Parks Canada ordered hydrants for Jasper with a different thread on the side ports than the thread used by all municipalities in Alberta and British Columbia. They only had 7 adapters which were available for hydrants to go from their thread to BAT. Our crews observed Petro Canada and mobile trailer park burned down and could not engage due to being able to connect to hydrants. Our crew were credited by a captain with the Jasper Fire Department for saving what's left of the downtown because they were at a hydrant that did have an adapter and were able to engage impingements on buildings. No secondary water sources were staged for when the hydrants would go down. The lesson learned from ParlVu events is that it's normal practice to have water supply is pre-positioned. Once it was confirmed that Arctic Fire Safety Services were deploying additional fire crews on behalf of an insurance company and resort owner, our 2 engine crews were released from Parks Canada response with no explanation given. The structure protection specialist asked my crew lead, does Chris really have 20 fire trucks waiting in Hinton to come in? On the afternoon of July 24th, I was contacted by a company based in the United States called Red Zone. They undertake wildfire analytics and wildfire dispatching for insurance companies. They asked if I had resources which could go to Jasper for one of their clients. I let them know I had 3 Type 6 engines, 1 Type 7 engine, a tactical tender able to deploy. We were hired and tasked to protect Marmot Basin Ski Resort and the Jasper Tram. Shortly thereafter, I was contacted by their client Pursuit Collections, and I told them I was fully deployed and they asked if we could find resources to protect their properties. I reached out to my other firefighting contractors as well as through a Facebook page for oilfield firefighters. By that night, I was able to assemble a fleet of 20 fire trucks and 50 certified firefighters, all making their way to Hinton. I even declined additional resources from other companies as I felt we had enough to meet our response needs. These other companies included Safety First from Drayton Valley, Safety Boss from Edmonton, New Venture from Whitecourt, Superior Fire from Grand Prairie, and Elite Oilfield Services from Grand Prairie. On the morning of July 25th, most of our crews were assembled at the Hinton UFA card locks so we can convey into Jasper. All crews drove through the night to get to Hinton for the morning. At 9:11, we departed the Hinton UFA card lock and made our way to Jasper. We were with the understanding from Pursuit and Parks Canada liaison that we had permission to enter. We got to the first set of roadblocks west of Hinton and were denied entry at the order of Parks Canada Incident Command and were turned around. We attempted again to make entry to parks after we believe we had the issue figured out at 1542, but once again denied entry. My notes done. At 1649, we were finally granted entry into Jasper Park. At 1855, we got into Jasper Fire and checked with the structure protection specialist. We split our teams into to do a hasty check of properties that we were assigned to. We were not granted access to Marmot Basin, Jasper Tram, or Malign Lake Road. Of the properties we were able to assess, none received damage. Of the properties we could not assess, the backcountry kitchen was destroyed, approximate value of $12.5 million. We did not see any signs of active fire behavior at this time and returned back to Hinton. Our crews were exhausted from driving all night into Jasper. Our crews were morally deflated from not being able to help in time. Throughout the Jasper fire, we encountered numerous examples of Parks Canada fire management actively obstructing our activities and not providing us with relevant information on the fire. We were provided rules of engagement, which we had to accept or be escorted out by the wardens. They reiterated twice by Parks Canada Operations Section Chief, second in charge to the incident commander, that we are not legally allowed to be there. These orders or rules of engagement included not being part of the incident management organization. Wildfire defense systems from Montana, who were hired by other insurers, were allowed to be part of the incident management organization. During the impingement during these rules of engagement, we were also ordered to not fight fire. We were denied access to Marmot Basin and Jasper Tram until July 29th. It's clear that there's fire behavior still threatening those sites, and the delayed ability to access those locations put the economic viability of Jasper at risk. We were denied access to the Athabasca River, or to the hydrant system, or to the no surrender, or to the fire and flood water systems to get water for firefighting. We had to bring in 8 400-barrel tanks from Hinton, had to bring in numerous truckloads of water from Hinton. The approximate cost to our client was $60,000 just to bring in water to fight fire.
Sorry, we're Mr. Levin, we're really over time here.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I'm just going to check. Mr. Levin, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Well, thank you for your testimony here. I don't know if you've been paying attention to the committee business that's been happening, but the last committee meeting we had, the Minister of Emergency Preparedness say to this committee that he left no stone unturned in order to do everything he could to prevent the loss of property in Jasper National Park. Would you agree with that sentence?
I would not.
Okay, the testimony that you've given before this committee today is actually quite alarming. So can you just confirm to me that in a short amount of time, you were able to muster 20 fire trucks and 50 professional firefighters? And could you tell me what the qualifications of those firefighters would be? Were they fire-tested firefighters?
Yes. So I did have 20 fire trucks and 50 firefighters. Majority of the firefighters I had were NFPA 10001, 10002, as well as numerous firefighters that were wildland firefighters, either wildland firefighter type 1 or wildland firefighter type 2.
So could you explain to the committee what that level of certification actually means? That's some fairly technical language. These are fully certified firefighters. These are, and you said each of them had credentials and have experience fighting fires before?
That's correct. So the NFPA qualifications are the same as any municipal firefighter. So similar to Calgary or Edmonton or any fire hall, majority of fire halls in Alberta do subscribe to the NFPA standard. So the volunteer firefighters are trained to the same standard as a big city fire department. The wildland firefighters are the same firefighters that qualifications that are recognized through CIFC. So the type 1 firefighter would be the government agency firefighter. The type 2 firefighter would be the contract firefighter.
Okay. In your testimony, you said that the hydrants in Jasper National Park are not the same as the hydrants that are used virtually everywhere else in British Columbia and Alberta. Did I hear that correctly?
That is correct.
So you also said there's only 7 adapters available. So I'm guessing when you say this, what you're meaning is the adapter that you would need to plug in to the hydrants in Jasper. There was only 7 of these adapters, so that I'm guessing the Jasper fire trucks, like the ones that are there all the time, are probably able to tie in. My experience from being a warden in Jasper, there's only a couple of fire trucks in town. I'm not belittling their fire service. I think it's a great volunteer fire service like everywhere else. But anybody else coming to the community to help would be virtually, they have 7 adapters. So basically 7 rigs could tie in. Is that right?
Aside from their mutual aid partners that they rely on, such as Hinton and Clearwater County, any other fire trucks coming at us that do not have a normal working relationship with the Parks Canada communities would not have these adapters on board. This is not part of common kit.
Okay, so that's certainly a factor that isn't helpful. But you were able to muster enough vehicles to provide water yourself as a contingency. You don't necessarily rely on being able to tie into a hydrant. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's been my experience from previous fires that the hydrant systems cannot be deemed as reliable when you have, because they're only designed to have 1 or 2 structure fires at a time. So when you have numerous fire trucks tying in, it is not impossible for the water system to be completely depleted. So that's why we now use secondary water sources to supply water.
And you had the fire trucks and the water trucks available in order to engage the fire in Jasper in the town site, correct?
That's correct.
And you were told specifically that you could not access, and you were told specifically by parks officials to not engage in fighting the fire in Jasper. Did I hear you say that correctly?
We were able to
Mr. Chair, I'd like to start off with Mr. Leavam. You had said that you were not legally allowed to be there. Could you explain why you were not?
That was what was explained to us by the operations section chief, the second in command to the incident commander. As far as I know, we were allowed to be there because this was through the Parks Canada liaison person and our client that made these arrangements for us to be in there. I guess there's no legislative process to allow contract firefighters to be in there on behalf of other parties. Must be the reasoning for that. But we did not show up there unanticipated. This was arrangements that were made on behalf of our client Pursuit and Parks Canada before we showed up. It's not like we showed up at the door and demanded to be let in like barbarians. It was our expectation that when we got to the gate that we were supposed to be permitted to go in to do our job to help protect the economic engine of Jasper.
Okay, and Mr. Leavam, one of the concerns was when the houses were burning and that they were releasing toxic fumes. Did you have the proper self-contained breathing apparatus to deal with a fire like that?
Self-contained breathing apparatus in WUI events are pretty much ineffective. You've only got about 30 minutes of air, and these trucks don't carry enough air on them to manage this kind of workload. My recommendation for all fire departments would be to get powered air respirator units that are full face respirator that have a battery powered assist on it, but I don't believe any fire departments had any of that equipment on them. We did have respirators on our trucks that had the P100 filters for our crew to use, and that's what the majority of the fire departments were using for that event.
So were you able to or qualified to do structural fires or not?
Yes, the crew that we had in there were all NFPA 1001 firefighters. The majority of them are part of active volunteer fire departments. So yes, the crew that I had in Jasper that night were all qualified 1001 firefighters.
So you were all qualified, but yet you were asked to leave and not assist with any structural fires then?
Yes.
Wow. And you don't have any reason as to why they would have done this for, do you?
The only reason I could think of is because we were coming in with another party that they didn't want to have, I don't know, leakage, or I really have no idea. They never explained that to me. They just released my 2 engines as other fire trucks were coming in. So I took those 2 engine crews and I put them on with my private response for the insurance company.
So they didn't say anything about that you didn't have the capabilities to tie into the hydrants or the proper fittings or anything that way. There was no reason other than just please leave.
That's right.
Wow. That's quite interesting. I don't know how to follow up on that questioning, to be honest with you. Maybe I'll go over to Monsieur Messier then. You know, you spoke about how man intervenes with fires or forest by putting out forest fires. Is it something that we need to start controlling or managing our forests a lot better to like clear out the deadfall, make sure that we can protect communities, not just within fire smarting, we're talking within the close proximity, but a mile or 2 miles or 3-4 kilometers away to manage the forest a lot better?
Très rapidement, s'il vous plaît, professeur Messier, comme dans 20 secondes.
Yes, very quickly. 20 seconds, yes.
We need to maybe talk to the First Nations. They've used wildfires for a long time. They know how to do it. And I think it could have a big impact around communities.
Merci.
Chair, I will start with you, Mr. Levin. You mentioned in your opening remarks that Parks Canada...
Sorry, is that directed at Mr. Willem?
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, the interpreters can't interpret him. So you could still ask him to submit something in writing if you wish, or make a statement, but he cannot.
We can't let him try to...
No, well, no, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Okay, I will ask Mr. Livum to answer in writing if he is possible. You said in your opening remarks that Parks Canada ordered hydrants for Jasper Park that were different than all of the rest in BC and Alberta, and then only 7 adapters that could be used on a moment's notice. Now, this is shocking evidence that Parks Canada officials certainly didn't say last week, and the Minister Guilbeault and Minister Sagen certainly made no mention of. What was the impact of that failure to order aligned fittings for hydrants? So if you could provide that in writing to this committee. You also mentioned that you were threatened and with arrest or removal on multiple times. So if you could further identify what those instances were, and if you know what officials with Parks Canada were deciding to intentionally turn away 20 trucks and over 50 firefighters, well-trained firefighters, and not only just turn them away with the apparent threat of force. If you could provide a little bit more detail to the committee on that. And lastly, as an expert that works regularly in the field on the ground, if you could provide a little bit of context as to whether or not, in your view, prescribed burns and mechanical removal are effective tools to mitigate the potential heat sources and damage caused by wildfires, particularly the one in Jasper, and in your expert opinion, whether or not enough of that was done by Parks Canada to prevent that from happening. And lastly, in your view, if Parks Canada was in fact negligent in its responsibilities that led to the disastrous fire in Jasper. So if you could all do that, I would appreciate that. I'll move back to Mr. Messier. You mentioned an increase in pests. What is the transmission of pests to our forests? Like, how does that happening?
Yeah, I was part of a committee, a national committee that, and I can send you the report, but you know, we are doing a lot of trade with Europe, the US, and the Asian and China. And interestingly enough, they have the same kind of climate, the same type of trees, and the risk of bringing an insect and a pest from these areas is very high. And actually, we are doing that almost every day. So that's actually one of the clear problem is we are trading with regions of the world that have similar species, and the risk of bringing a species where the trees in this original country, they have adapted to it, but here they are not adapted to it. And this is what's happening, and it's increasing.
Thank you, Mr. Messier. I just want to give the rest of my time to Mr. Deltel.
Perfect.
$45 seconds, Mr. Deltel.
Mr. Messier. Yes, go ahead. Mr. Messier, thank you very much for your approach, which I find very practical. Your vision is very tangible and concrete and impressive. Like you have heard the firefighters' testimony, and I can see how attentive you were. Could you tell us what you feel about it? 30 seconds. Well, it's really not in my purview. I was very surprised to hear that all available resources weren't there to fight fires. And I imagine that there must be certain structural problems with regards to management and with all the different organizations, but I can't really pronounce myself more than that. But like us, you must have been shocked and outraged to hear that there are firefighters who are there willing to fight. Yes, well, we've got over 4 minutes. Maiden Taylor-Rose, it's your turn now.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I realize that Mr. Levin can't respond, but just for the record, I was hoping that you could verify for us that your company is a for-profit company, it's not volunteer, and that you were on the ground.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Lowen, will you table the records of Alberta's spending on wildfire management going back the next 10 years for this committee to review?
Yes, absolutely. Again, we increased the budget by 55%. We went from $100.4 million to $155.4 million. And we also increased our contingency amount that was available. Last year was $1.5 billion, and this year was $2 billion. So another 33% increase there.
Thank you, Minister. Minister Ellis, you alluded to issues with Unified Command. I was told that Alberta was not invited to join the Unified Command until July 27th, I believe. Is that true? And if so, why the delay for Alberta to be included in Unified Command?
Well, that's a good question. I think a question you should probably ask the minister or the national park. We, of course, wanted to be included in the Unified Command from a decision-making perspective right from the very beginning. At this point, we were only in an advisory role, but believe me, these are conversations I had with Minister Sajjan, who did his best to try and get us in a decision-making position.
So the minister didn't seem opposed to being a Unified Command, but somebody within Parks Canada or the town, presumably, who were leading the Unified Command, were involved?
So the conversation I had with Minister Sajjan, he did not seem opposed for us being in a position of Unified Command from a decision-making perspective. But he's not the decision maker as far as the minister when it comes to who's on that.
Who is the decision maker?
Well, the minister, I'm assuming, who's responsible for the national park.
That would be Minister Guilbeault. My next question goes to our Forest Products Association witnesses. Back in 2017, the Alberta Forest Products Association, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Jasper, Jim McGlinskey, numerous forest scientists, including Ken Hodges, wrote numerous letters to the Minister of Environment, Catherine McKenna, at the time in this Liberal government, talking about the catastrophic threat to Jasper of a wildfire. And the responses at the time that were given to them in question period and in letters was that the ecological integrity of the park must be protected. Your organization has to abide by regulations involving sustainability and all these matters. In your opinion, does it maintain the ecological integrity of a national park to maintain large swaths of dead pine beetle infested forest?
Thanks for the question. So, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of Parks Canada because there are laws around what type of management can take place. But I can say that it was known that, and I think what Minister Lowen had said, that the forest product sector and the province of Alberta were starting to implement the Healthy Pine Strategy. So actually targeting pine stands to reduce the risk of flammability. And that same level of intervention was not taking place within the park.
It's a simple question. Is it promoting ecological integrity to let stands of dead, mature pine beetle infested trees to stand in a national park? Is that promoting ecological integrity?
Well, I think it comes down to what level of risk are we comfortable based on where we live today, and that risk is increasing. So I think in the past, having static reserves was meant to act as essentially something that could be monitored in time, almost like a test case.
Would you say that young forests, though, when a forest company replants a forest, puts in new trees, they're more resilient to forest fires? Is that the case?
Yeah, essentially, you want to manage the level of fuels.
Thank you.
So reducing the fuels and replanting a forest will be more resilient. Yeah.
It's been noted to me, you alluded to federal policies that are impacting wildfire risk, not just in national parks, but outside of national parks. And you alluded that you don't think there's a fire lens being included. Is the Species at Risk Act one of those policies? Is that contributing to wildfire risks in Canada?
There is growing concern, and I've actually had the opportunity to fly over parts of Alberta because I have been working on caribou recovery across Canada, and there's growing concern that these older stands that have been set aside for caribou pose increased risk of burning, which will actually not be helpful for caribou recovery and not be helpful for communities that live in and around those areas. So a fire lens is something that we are recommending.
Back in 2017, the Alberta Forest Products Association, in a letter in the Edmonton Journal, said that they believed it would be about $85 million to combat the mountain pine beetle, which they specifically cited that the pine beetle was allowed to run rampant in Jasper National Park. What do you think the cost would be to the federal government to manage the forests in Canada's national parks?
What would it cost them?
Maybe you can send that to me in writing because I've only got about 30 seconds left. One of my Liberal colleagues said the other day that they didn't think it was really feasible to do active forest management techniques in national parks and that it wouldn't really do much to prevent fires. Do you agree with that assessment?
I mean, there's actually a video that's been made showcasing how CAN4 was brought in to do some thinning, and I think it was effective in saving parts of Jasper. And so if that could have been deployed in a larger area, that could have been effective in mitigating. And so it is possible. I think it will take some cross learning between park staff and commercial forestry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.